Okay, hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to VUX World with me, your host, Kane Sims. And today we are going to have an epic conversation about how to get AI off the ground in the enterprise. I know that there's a lot of barriers and challenges to doing that. We've spoke to many companies lately who have got, I would say, even fake barriers in place, really. We need to sort out our AI policy first before we do anything, and we need to put our governance in place before we do anything. And all the while that all of this bureaucracy is going on, no customers are being served effectively, no learning is happening in terms of what these tools are good for and how they can be leveraged. And so today, with Stephan Schuessler, we're going to talk about how to make that happen, how to get AI off the ground in the enterprise. And before I introduce Stephan, I'm going to give a shout out to our presenting sponsor for this episode of VUX World, Intel. Now, thank you to Intel for sponsoring this episode and all episodes so far of VUX World over this quarter. And the reason why Intel is so interesting is that you'll be aware of the big kind of push by many organizations to improve how they infer and use inference when it comes to their AI models. And there's a huge demand for processors, chips, GPUs, and all of those kind of things. What Intel has managed to do with its Intel Core Ultra processor is take the same kind of technology that is going around and that's in really high demand on the infrastructure side and put it into your PC. Believe it or not, they have the Intel Core Ultra processor is an NPU, a neural processing unit, and the goal of this is to make your life far easier. If you are working in an enterprise and you're leveraging over time more AI capabilities, which you will be, you can essentially, for some of the specific AI workloads, the Intel Core Ultra will manage those processes for you. It will streamline those processes, make them far more efficient. It can improve your ability to get things done, improve your productivity. It also has a huge impact on your battery life, so you can work for longer without having to charge things up all the time. And also, it comes with the Intel V Pro, which essentially allows you to secure and fully manage your fleet remotely. So if you are an IT manager, if you're looking at refreshing your fleet of laptops, which many of you will be, given the last purchase was probably around about COVID sort of time, if you are looking at investing in new laptops for your organization, you can do a lot worse than looking at Intel Core Ultra and the Intel V Pro platform. It is literally, I would say, a couple of steps ahead of most other kind of competitors because of the fact that it's got a clear focus on helping you leverage AI and helping your AI automation workflows a lot better. And so if you are interested in that, you can check out vux.la/Intel. That is vux.la/Intel to learn more. Thank you again, Intel, for sponsoring VUX World. So, Stephan, welcome to the podcast. Welcome to VUX World. You are the head of intelligent automation and conversational AI in Deloitte, Germany. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you kind of got interested in conversational AI?
Yeah, thanks, Kate, for the time and for the invitation here. Let me quickly introduce myself. So I'm already doing the work in conversational AI space for the last 7 years now, starting with smaller kind of POC pilot implementations. But my current focus also driving intelligent automation here in Germany, and conversational AI is a part of doing intelligent automation of interactions, specifically customer interactions. Our focus is clearly to do that at scale with large enterprises. So that's my prime focus for now.
Nice one. And we met, when did we meet? February, was it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
Oh, God,
it's
it feels
quite
like
a while.
it feels like a lifetime ago now, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Um, I would say maybe February. And this year for me, I don't know if you would concur. It really feels as though this year so far has been a year of figuring out what generative AI is good for. Maybe the hype has died down ever so slightly, and it's more about kind of, how do we actually leverage this stuff effectively? Would you concur with that general sentiment?
Yeah, 100%. And maybe looking also a bit into the market here in Germany. Still, I think there's a lot of potential for the more traditional kind of conversation AI solutions still in the market. But now with the opportunities which generative AI can add to the stack, there's even more demand, and generative AI created a huge hype, specifically also for business leaders to think about what's possible. with all the myths here and the realities. But still, I think generative AI is just a great addition to what we are doing to automate conversations and also to help agents.
Mm. And I suppose I suppose what you're referencing there is that there are lots of organizations that have had AI programs running for a while. They've got probably a more traditional machine learning based stack, if you like, using NLU systems, natural language understanding systems, and they're using and leveraging generative AI to improve that. A great example probably is in your neck of the woods, Lufthansa. Really great kind of chatbot they've had for a long time. Uses NLU in 90 to 99% of situations, but generative AI is being used kind of under the hood. If it fails to classify an intent or something like that, it will throw it to a generative model and see if it can mop up some of the kind of flack, if you like. And there's some banks in the UK that are trialing the same sort of approach. How do you see kind of net new customers? Because you've kind of got two camps now emerging. One is that some camps and probably vendors have this perception of everything actually is better off being Gen AI end to end, and that's kind of the default position now. Whereas others have got a more sort of like blended approach, which is actually the default for an enterprise should really be NLU, but then we can leverage Gen AI in specific capabilities for what it's good at. What's your kind of perspectives on that?
Yeah, as you just see, it's still Gen AI is a bit of a younger technology here. So if I look into, and now first let me focus quickly a bit on the more German market, and then we can expand. So we are usually doing multinational projects, at least for our clients. But if I look specifically into German or kind of also the EU market, it's sometimes quite difficult to set on full Gen AI powered solutions, also bearing in mind what kind of risk might occur and how much reputational risk you can still allow yourself. So what I still see as the traditional, more kind of NLU approaches as a great basis to get started, because that's much easier also from a compliance perspective with most clients, even in regulated businesses, because we can just ensure accuracy and then adding Gen AI features. So I think at the moment, at least, the hybrid approach is really something which can lift and shift business to the next level. While there is for sure Gen AI coming up more and more on the horizon, but from an enterprise readiness perspective to really manage all the risk associated, that's still, from my perspective, quite difficult to manage. So I think this hybrid approach currently is basically a holy grail to make that happen.
Interesting. And I suppose then let's take that hybrid approach. Where do you see generative AI adding extra value in a sort of traditional ML sort of stack?
Yeah, I think especially where we use that. So if you have the standards, traditional LM stack, and you can just understand the intent easily, okay, fine, you don't need anything else. But especially if customers have long sentences, long user inputs, Gen AI really helps to shorten it, to understand the intent based on a longer kind of conversational path by the customer. And what we really use it for is we want to understand classifiers, entities, and so on, because it's just much more flexible to really understand entities, especially if a customer just is correcting him or herself during the conversation. So I think that's one of the key drivers where Gen AI adds a lot of value and drives automation rates.
Mm. Yeah, that definitely. I mean, the if you really just break down what generative AI is from a language model perspective, not from an image generation or perspective, but really it's two things, isn't it? It's basically understanding, at least not necessarily understanding as we would understand, but semantically finding similarities in things
Yeah.
that have been said, uh, and then if you like creating based on a data set, either it's native data set or data that you give it. Um, so I suppose really when you think about the capabilities that Gen AI is good at, and I suppose reasoning could be part of the understanding part, but I think that's probably in its infancy in terms of business application. I think that you hit the nail on the head there, which is that you know if you're using it for what it's good at, which is understanding, then it can cater for some of the gaps that you like, if you like, with the NLU sort of system. I suppose the question is when it comes to the second part of the generating bit, obviously that's therein lies the risk in terms of potential hallucinations and all that lot. But there are
Yeah.
other ways maybe that you could use it in terms of trying to make the conversation more flexible. So if someone says
Yeah.
something you don't understand, maybe you can create something that's more contextual to their previous turn to then guide them or ground the conversation. Like, do you still see the same risk aversion to using Gen AI in that type of context that's not specifically information retrieval type of thing?
And that's specifically for me, there's a large bandwidth at the moment. So there are companies in my customer base or in our customer base who still are quite risk averse, or they are so regulated that they fear just to have something which cannot solve the regulation issue anymore. And we have other customers who are going to more flexible implementations utilizing AI-based agents, Gen AI-based agents on a smaller focus. So really some small focused agents to understand certain parts of the conversation, rephrase things even better to get the input we need. Which I think it's better controllable if we implement it in that way. But I think there's quite a lot of appetite at the moment going into that direction and try it out. And secondly, I think what you can do with quite low risk is rephrasing things. So you have a more generic kind of answer in your conversation and then tailor it a bit to the actual situation without let the LLM go crazy at all. So that's still, I think, a quite controlled manner to do that.
Yeah, yeah. What is your kind of feelings around kind of market expectations for this technology? So the kind of things we're talking about here is that we want to have control over the conversation, we want to have control over the content, but we want to add little bits of kind of stardust into it
Yeah.
to make it a little bit nicer and a bit more pleasant and less rigid like some traditional chatbots can be. Do you find that through speaking with clients that that sort of vision is an acceptable vision, or do you think that, or is your experience rather, that the expectation at the outset is that this technology is pretty much magic and it should be able to deal with all of the dynamics of conversation, and we should be able to have free flowing, human like, completely natural conversations that let the LLMs do what they're good at, which is have talking and producing language and stuff like that. Like, is there any of that kind of expectation management required, or is it a little bit more, as you suggested in Germany, a bit more risk averse, perhaps, where customers are maybe don't have that expectation and they just want more control?
Yeah, so I think that's one of my daily discussions with clients. So I'm quite a lot discussing with senior executives, and our main client base is about insurance,
Mm.
and their risk aversity is part of the game basically. But still, there is quite a lot of expectation to make things better, to make things more fluent. So basically, this kind of stardust and understanding things better, because it's not so much about only feeling well, but also for the customer, but also really understanding the customer in the first attempt. And I think that's currently where we focus on, because in the end, let's take one of our insurances. So really large 7 countries implementation, several 2-digit million calls a year, which are automated. For most of the customers, if you have a storm or hail damage, so a mass disaster, basically, for them, it's not so important that the experience is nice and really, yeah, nice and appreciative. So still a good conversation design is pretty important. But for them, it's much more important to file their claim immediately and they feel secured, because they don't need to hang in the queue and wait for hours or even longer to get their claim filed. And therefore, it's more important that we get it right in the first attempt. Whereas we have other clients which are more in a non so regulated environment, like B2C business for different brands, where we are more experimental in using it, because if you look more into the sales area, marketing area, utilizing better voice, responding better to customer needs is much more important to really achieve what you want to achieve.
Mm.
And that's the two basically two positions I see here quite a lot.
Yeah, I suppose it's the trade off between form and function, isn't it? You know, you kind of, it
Exactly.
sounds as though some customers want the function and they want it to do its job and they're less bothered about the form. However, I tend to think that you kind of still need to have a bit of both because the function could be functionally great but a terrible use
Yeah.
case, and therefore there's no real need to try that again because it was terrible. The satisfaction is not great. Sometimes the design of the form can actually have a bearing on the completion of the task and stuff like that. So yeah, I don't know what your kind of thoughts are in
But
terms of that form versus function question.
I think that's first of all, fully agree with what you're stating, and for me, it's sometimes looking what is out there in the market. Sometimes it is just a terrible experience. So, and if I'm not able to get my claim done in the first attempt, and it's a logical kind of setup for me, then I will just leave the experience and try to get the things solved in a separate way. So for me, and that's already for from the beginning. For me, it's important that we understand how humans want to interact and how we understand that in the best manner. And then it's also sometimes because some, especially large enterprises, tend to look into their process model, and then they want to prepare a conversation based on the process flow. But for me, it's much more and that's something we do just right in the beginning with our clients to discuss what is a natural conversation flow. Let me just take one example I recently discussed. It was about, hey, if you understand an insurance policy number in the first attempt, and then because you only need for authentication, the date of birth as the next step, and not asking for the name before then, that's just doesn't feel natural to people if you, as a second question, ask them for the date of birth. If you ask for the name before that, no matter if you utilize it for authentication or not, and then ask for date of birth, it's just a natural flow. People stay with the conversation, they like it. So for me, that's really essential that we focus on yeah, human and customer experience to drive the conversation before that.
Yeah, yeah, 100% agree with that. um, where do you kind of see or what do you think needs to happen for some of those types of businesses to, I suppose, be more comfortable with those Gen AI applications? And I'm not suggesting that that sounds as though I'm trying to start with the solution, which is Gen AI is the solution. It's not always the solution, so
Yes.
that's not necessarily the case. But let's say, for example, that there is a use case that a client has that actually would benefit from generative AI. Let's say, for argument's sake, that they have a bunch of insurance policy documents that they have a lot of questions that get asked about, and there is a potential solution there, which is to have a look at that data, clean it up, make it in a good kind of format, and then use retrieval augmented generation to answer contextual questions based on specific policies. That for me seems to be a perfect opportunity to use generative AI. You could use an intent-based model, but for something where you've got so much potential similarity between different bits of content, it might be easier, if you like, to use retrieval augmented generation. So let's take that as a use case. Like, what do you think currently, based on the current technology and the current expectations of clients, what would it take for them to be more comfortable using a solution like that in production?
Yeah, let me start with maybe how we do that, or where I see the easiest way of application, and that's how we're doing it. So we are not currently, at the first step, implement rack-based solutions directly customer facing, but start that agent facing, because that really helps our clients to get trust in what's happening, and also to understand how their technology works, how different kind of prompting can influence what's the result of the REC solution is, and how much is the actual rate of the model behind that. Because I guess you have the same experience here. Usually all the documents you have in place, and sometimes there is some expectation, just drop all the documents as they are into a rack-based model and everything will work. And that's something which is, yeah, intended also by the customers. But sometimes they are so complex that even the latest models are not are not really 100% capable of understanding everything. And then it requires a bit of effort to make these documents digestible for a model in a good way. But this only works, from my experience, if you start somewhere and if you start agent facing and get direct feedback from agents who can evaluate was the answer correct, and you give them also kind of the link to what's written in the document, then you start creating the change in understanding and how you can roll it out. And if you feel comfortable to pave the way, basically to go also customer facing as a next step, but first of all, get the internal feeling
Yeah.
that this is correct and right.
Yeah, and you know, there's a lot to be said for that sort of approach. And we were chatting to somebody today about this kind of exact thing, which is one approach that certain vendors probably, if I'm being honest, would take if they're trying to sell something is to say, give me all your content, we'll ingest all your content, and then you'll have a chatbot. And as you alluded to there, some business content is not in a place where you want to kind of ingest that, because you're
Yeah,
just putting so much expectation on the model to first of all find it, then summarize it, then rephrase it so it's not based on all this jargon, then sense check it to make sure it's accurate, and it's all this kind of strain placed on multiple models or multiple prompts to transform the data at runtime. Whereas if you just put the extra effort into saying, well, let's have a look at our data, let's actually just ourselves chunk it up ourselves, so we can understand that this stuff's related to this customer type and this is related to that type of question, and here's these topics go together, and like just organize our data a little bit. Actually, this doesn't even make sense, this isn't even current, that's out of date, let's not bother with that. Like just that kind of process. There's a really good example of Millennium Bank in the US that took this approach, and they found that after cleaning up the data and getting rid of all the stuff that doesn't matter and is irrelevant, and then rewriting it based on what to make the language model's job easier, basically rewrite it so that like this is the kind of answer that we would put in front of a customer because we're that confident about it. What they found is actually they didn't even need to do any generation when it comes to the retrieval augmented generation. They just retrieved the information and served it as it was because it was so good. you
yeah,
know
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think that's something which is still quite new. So and also what we see currently, especially if you have quite extensive kind of documents with a lot of cross links in the documents, it's still quite hard for an LLM to cope with that in a RAG-based solution. So I think there's other technologies now popping in how we can even make it more robust, especially if there are cross links from one section in a document to another section in the end, because there are quite a lot of sections in such documents which sound quite similar if you read them. And then there's sometimes a limit how many chunks you can put into the LLM to get a proper answer and really reflecting everything what was written in the document.
Definitely. What are your thoughts around small language models? And I think a lot of the issue, that the risk, I suppose, is large language models hallucinate because they've got the world's knowledge inside them, and therefore if they can't find a specific accurate match in terms of a query based on what's in the vector database, therefore there's scope for it to fill in the blanks with some of its world knowledge. Whereas with small language models, arguably there is a little bit more control that you can have there, because it's got less knowledge, if you like, in inverted commas, and you can fine tune them a lot easier, and you can put them somewhere that's on your own servers and stuff like that. So I don't know if you've had much demand from clients in terms of exploring small language models, or if not, like where do you see the value of small language models, if any?
Yeah, so if I look into these kind of small, so not currently, I think there is just initial demand at the moment because first perception of the large language models, they are quite easily available for anybody. That's usually currently the starting point of the discussion. I think especially small language models, and you need to put in some effort to really make them focused on what you want to achieve with them. That's the
Mm.
next step, because now you take back a bit the easiness of, okay, just use a large language model how it is, and the capabilities to build something which is a bit more targeted on your specific environment, industry, use cases. That's something you need to put some effort again into it to really make it streamlined and working. So for me, that's the next step. Currently, at least with the clients I'm serving at the moment, there is just initial demand in discussing that. But that's also maybe given the fact that especially here, so large language model based bots are not in the forefront at the moment to go for enterprise large scale implementations.
Mm,
Um, but
interesting.
I'm pretty sure this will come up as the next step because,
Yeah.
as you just mentioned, they are able to cope with some of the weaknesses which a large language models brings with the broad range of content. So I think that's a good way forward.
Yeah. I wonder whether they'll be kind of in the same way as we didn't really ever get there, but there were signs of getting there with NLU models where there was like domain specific models, so some vendors would have like a banking NLU and it was all pre-populated with banking based intents and stuff like that. There was even some vendors like Casisto and, Clink and others that were like only focused in the banking sector and they've got very specific tooling around that. Like I wonder whether you think there may be or we may see over time, specific fine-tuned small language models for specific industries, for specific skill sets or capabilities like classification or entity extraction, or because every bank or every insurance company probably has the same type of dialogue happening, probably has the same kind of entities that they need to extract and stuff like that. Like, I don't know if you think that that's a problem worth solving, or will everyone solve that individually? Do you think?
Yeah, so I think it's at least solving the basis, but I think the next step then again is if you can fine tune that models because you have this basic knowledge which is domain specific. I think domain specific is the best approach at the moment here, and then you need to add a bit of the company specific language and and phrases to make that even more robust, but you can build on a solid core of industry or domain specific knowledge, and that model. I think that's really the next step of implementing and scaling it.
Yeah. One of the things that I found very interesting from the conversations that I was part of and observed the presentations at the event that we met at, there was a Cognigy event in February, was the approach that in fact, my takeaway was that this is the approach that most German companies are taking. And I'd be curious to see if there's anything changed, because I think that the starting point is a very sensible starting point, and it's a starting point that we kind of recommend as well, which is that most of the time, most businesses have a very sporadic approach to how they manage contact. Whatever channel, there's this thing which is like omni-channel, which means that any contact channel that any customer contacts us on, they've got to be able to be served in that channel. And if you look at the data, Andrew Moorhouse and Analytical did some studies in the banking sector, and it found that if you look at the live chat transcripts, they analysed 10,000 live chat transcripts for one of the banks in the UK. And they found that there was some intents, some customer needs that just could not be resolved in chat. Just was impossible to do. You had to phone for some things, you had to use the app for some things. There's just some things that live agents cannot deal with. Yet chatbots are escalating everybody, no matter what the issue is, into the agent conversations, not knowing that there's some conversations that the agents cannot deal with. And so the recommendation that fell out of this analysis, and this is exactly what we kind of teach to organizations, is the first thing to do is to unify your intent taxonomy. Because your call center might have 90 disposition codes, your chatbot might have 150 intents, but your live chats in your call center might actually deal with 280 different issues. So you
Yeah.
need to understand what that is, and then you need to figure out what the best way of solving each of those needs is. And then, really, the value of AI ought to be triaging the customer from any channel into the right channel. And the real takeaway from that event in Germany was that that's basically what all of those companies were doing. Allianz Insurance, Lufthansa, Kaufland, Lidl. That was the approach that they were all taking. And it was a real sort of breath of fresh air for me. So I don't know whether, in your kind of client roster and your approach, whether that's still something that you kind of recommend as the first port of call. Is that still the kind of cultural thing to happen in Germany, or is things kind of changed?
I think that's a really great example of. So if I look a bit in the past, there were always companies trying to get use cases solved. So they take separate use cases and start implementing bots for it to solve a customer request and issue, no matter basically what a channel strategy is about and how you can answer that. Nowadays, with the rise of how can we really automate customer contact center interactions, and there is a lot of appetite now to scale it because people understand nowadays that this is working perfectly well. It's now more willingness also to start from a different standpoint and really look into, okay, what's your target picture in terms of what are the channels you want to serve, which kind of use cases or customer requests can you solve on which channel, and where do we try to direct the people in the right channel of choice. So sometimes it's about, okay, there's a self-service available that is easily utilizable. Okay, why should people, even if a chatbot can't or a voice bot can't solve it, why should they stay in the line? So we at least offer them to do a channel switch here. Other than that, looking into, okay, as you just mentioned, so one nice example for me is if you have a phone call, it's quite difficult sometimes to really understand things. So we're doing a lot of work, for example, for roadside assistance services where you need a towing truck somewhere. Try to explain someone on the phone where to send the towing truck towards. That's quite difficult. But if you now utilize with a voice bot also capabilities to send out a quick app, utilize the location of the phone where they are calling from, and then just grab all this information and create a towing request to a towing truck driver. That's just more accurate than trying to describe things via phone. And for me, it's how to utilize which channel for which specific issue. What is the best channel? And that's something we try always to get started in the design phase with our customers. Not one size fits all, but what is really a channel strategy, and how do you want also to handle your customers, and what is also the requirements of your customers? Because sometimes it's also, I want to do some chat. Yeah, but do your customers accept chat as a channel? So that's a second question you also need to discuss. Yeah. So, and if they are not actively using chat at the moment, can we bring them to that area where they really utilize it heavily?
Yeah. That's a really great point, that, which is that, there is two things at play here. One is the expectation of the business, which is this use case should be conversational at all costs. The other is the perception of the customer, which I think is sometimes an ill-found perception, and it's an assumption, which is that some customers just want to talk. And the reality is, most customers, regardless of age, actually just want to get their job done and get their issues solved. And they just think that there's a path of least resistance, which is to just get through to someone. So I think that, so in that example there, which is you've got a client, they expect magic from generative AI. They want this free flowing back and forth conversation. That's what they think the use case is, because people just want to talk. So how do you approach then? That would be a total change of scope, basically, which is, hold on, we need to figure out the channel strategy here, and we need to actually assess whether this is the right type of use case to be even bothering to have a conversation over, because you've got it already in the app, and the app works really, really well. So why don't we just put people there? That's a totally different, it's a less sexy project. It's not going to win this person kind of, brownie points at the business for doing something innovative, but that's maybe the best thing to do for the customer. So how do you approach them kind of conversations?
And that's basically the topic where we start in the beginning, really to put a realistic view. So just go a bit away of all the fanciness of technologies which is out there, but more try to, what is the issue? What is the right technology to solve it? And that's a starting point where nowadays I feel many of the representatives, the senior representatives, our customers, are really up for to have this discussion, because they made this other experience in the past. Just let's automate fractions here and fractions there, and now really talk with them about how can you change interaction going forward. The other thing you just mentioned, and I think that's at least some experience here, is everybody has quite invested quite a lot in preparing portals, apps, whatsoever. But especially if you have low frequency users where you don't use this app quite often, the moment if they have an issue, they are not able to go into that app because they can't log in or whatever the reason is. So then sometimes it's easier if you have a service and process chain already available where you can automate things also to just let the voice bot do that job. If people really want to call you, okay, give them the option with low friction to get also stuff done. But especially if you mentioned there are things where you need to upload certain things and where it's quite difficult on the phone, for example, try to bring them to a channel which you can use frictionless. And sometimes the app is maybe not the most frictionless way to do that. A banking app is not an issue because people tend to go into their banking or basically on a daily basis. So that's not an issue. That's a great way, I think, to deflect them into that channel to do stuff more easily. But for, yeah, people who just go once a year into an app, that's maybe not the best approach here.
Yeah, I suppose things like insurance. I don't know what it's like in Germany, but certainly in the UK, if I have car insurance, in fact, my car is in the garage now, and one of the things I had to provide when I took it to the garage because it was under warranty and so they need to fix it was proof of insurance, and I
Mm-hmm.
could not find proof of insurance. All my emails, can't find it. Can't find any policy documents. Can't find it in any of my files. I cannot find any evidence that I'm even insured on my car. But I am because I remember doing it. I got a letter from the police. Basically, they said, "We've found your car. We've scanned it. It's not insured. Get it insured." I thought, "Oh my god, they're on to me." So I had to. I forgot it had expired. I had to insure it. We did that a few months ago. Can't for the life of me find out what the policy is. So I know what insurer it is. I just need to get. Now I'm probably gonna have to ring them up and say,
Yeah,
"This is my details. Like I know that you've insured us, but I've got no evidence." So that's a sort of typical situation where I'm not going to be an app user because I don't really care. I should never have to deal with the insurance provider. That's the whole point. But when I need you, you're not going to get me into an app, because I need something solving now. So yeah, I'm sure there's loads of industries that are very similar to that.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And I think especially this example is really a nice example. If you just call in and you have the use case itself is not too complicated to really fully automate them. So if you have a good authentication and you have your preferred channel, which is basically, I would suppose, your email address, which is still with the insurance company anyways. So let just the system send you the insurance contract again, and then you have the proof of insurance. I think that's a good example where it's quite easy not to try some channel lifting and shifting, but just solve the issue with your first call. So, and then really increase first call resolution because it's basically use case of 1 or 2 minutes to get this done.
Yeah, perfect. And exactly, even with things like email, if the email identifier is the only identifier they have, maybe the address, maybe in that situation you might kind of defer to an omni-channel interaction. So it's like, okay, I know I get your email address. I'm going to text you, and just respond to that text with your email address. So bang, there's my email address. No mistakes with speech recognition, no issues. Next, I'm going to need your postcode. Text me a postcode. Whatever it might. I know we actually voice is not too bad at postcodes, but like as an example, to use the affordances that you have, recognize it's a mobile number, send them a text message, gather the data, and then just email me because you've got my email address. Email me the policy documents, and then that's the job done.
And absolutely, I think that was also the example I just mentioned with the towing trucks, so the location services. So just sending a text message out of a call and then help people to get on a different device without any friction. So it's really easy to just click on the link and then just submit your location. I think that's exactly the right approach in mixing up channels in a right way to make customers' life easier because they are happy in the end if the issue is solved immediately and not waiting for long.
Mm,
And so sending out this kind of apps or messages and just helping to respond with complicated things that really works well and customers perceive that as well. So our experience is also that with customers they really like it because it's fast and easy for them.
yeah, effortless, isn't it? Um, Brilliant. So maybe in kind of wrapping up, what are some of the I don't know, red flags or some of the real kind of like things that you think businesses need to consider when it comes to We've spoke a lot about potentially looking at, ways in which you can make the experience as best as possible and use the UI affordances or the channels that you've got access to, etc. We've spoke a little bit about potentially where Gen AI can play a role and what it's good at and stuff like that and mitigating risk. Like, what are some of the key either principles or things that businesses need to get right when it comes to beginning on this kind of journey?
For me, the first and really utmost important thing is have your target picture right. Really understand what you want to achieve and what are your goals and channels you want to achieve that up on right from the beginning. So otherwise, it's kind of a evolution which can become messy after a while if you don't work in the right direction right from the beginning. And second thing I have for me is don't use technology just for the sake of technology, because that's currently a discussion which I'm facing on a daily basis. Okay, there's new technology out, let's use it. No, please look at the use case you want it to solve and then decide what the right technology is to make that robust, and also discuss about what are your expectation and how much risk can you afford yourself. So if people tell me, okay, I want a 100% correct answer anytime, and there is no leeway for that, I think the answer is quite clear. Maybe then it's not the best use case to get started with fully Gen AI powered actions. And that's something I really want to discuss with my clients right from the beginning. And I think for me, that's a red flag, because if you don't think about that from the beginning, later in the project, if you come to a point where you want to go live with a solution, maybe then there is a red flag from somebody else if you don't think about that right from the beginning. So for me, it's always do proactive kind also of project risk management in terms of what needs to be done, what needs to be approved to make it as robust as possible for enterprise, because we're talking about large scale enterprise implementations, and there is a certain governance also which needs to be applied for good reason.
Yeah, but what about autonomous AI agent swarms, though, Stefan, that just go off and do all of your work for you without any human involvement whatsoever in the enterprise?
I think that's a dream everybody has at the moment. And I think there are first parts to make that happen. And I think especially if you look into more internal kind of use cases, that's a nice starting point also to get some experience, still have human in the loops to really prove that it works. Um, I'm a bit skeptical from a customer-facing point of view that we will see a lot of these kind of swarms of autonomous agents soon, just given that there's also a certain risk or certain compliance things. We are progressing quite well, for sure, and also getting reasoning out of large language models and so on, but we are still on the way. And from my perspective, it's evolving, definitely. But for me, also the internal use cases in that sense are the first ones to just have a bit more security layers around that, and to get experience, because anyways, in the end, it's you need certain experience to really make it happen at large scale enterprises.
Well said. Agreed. Thank you so much, Stefan, for joining us. It's an absolute pleasure. It's been a real pleasure conversation. I mean, I think we've only scratched the surface on a lot of this kind of stuff, and we've kind of been a whistle stop tour. So perhaps we'll do this again sometime, and we can get into a bit more detail. But it's really appreciated to spend some time with you, pick your brains, get your perspectives, and brilliant stuff. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the invitation. It was really a pleasure meeting you again here.
Likewise, and maybe we'll see you again sometime soon in Germany.
Yeah, perfect. Looking forward to it.
Nice one. Thank you all for tuning in. It's been an absolute pleasure again. Thank you to Intel for sponsoring this episode of VX World, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks now. Bye.